Narratives. I'm George Samueli, and it is, yes, time for the Thursday night edition of the live stream. Welcome, everybody who has joined me. I really appreciate it. And today is, of course, a special day here in Hungary. It's a national holiday, the day that Hungarians celebrate the founding of the Hungarian state more than 1,000 years ago. So it's a very, very big day here, which means that we may be disturbed. I hope we won't be. We may be disturbed by the sound of fireworks. So fireworks should be starting quite shortly. But I hope we won't be too inconvenienced by it. But anyway, thank you for everybody who's joined me. And I want to start off with the some screaming and hysteria and hair pulling that has been going on in Europe over the past 48 hours. So, whenever these things happen, you assume that, well, Russia has done something or other, and therefore all the usual suspects are fulminating over Russia. And then, then there has been the drones, the familiar drones in Romania. This is now an ongoing thing, and there's been, once again, screaming from President Dan, some guy called Dan, who claims to be the president of Ukraine, not Ukraine, sorry, president of Romania, and he says, "Yeah, I'm very unhappy. Russia is launching these drones at us." So that's that's a very familiar story. No need to waste any time on that. But what the latest aggravation in Europe is about is a little unusual. Perhaps not so unusual if you're familiar with Europe, but the target of the Europeans' ire is not Russia but the United States. So what is it the United States has done? No, it's not Trump bombing Iran. That doesn't arouse too much aggravation. Excuse me for a moment. Sorry, I had to close the door. I have air conditioning on, and I don't, and sometimes the door opens. But anyway, no, it's not Trump bombing Iran, not Trump threatening Iran, Trump threatening to strangle Iran. It is the Trump administration's imposition of sanctions. Yes, sanctions, right? Trump administration imposes sanctions on many countries and many entities. But what it has done now is impose sanctions on the particular bête noire of the Trump administration, namely the International Criminal Court. Now, as we know, the Trump administration, and in fact, the United States has had a somewhat fraught relationship with the ICC almost from the beginning. The U.S. was under the Clinton administration during the 1990s was very actively involved in creating the Rome Statute, and initially, I think maybe you heard you can hear the fireworks. So it was involved in that, and then the Clinton administration signed on to the ICC, and of course, no one in his right mind believed that any U.S. administration would be willing to cede its sovereignty to some supranational entity such as the ICC. But nonetheless, that signature stayed on the books. Of course, neither Clinton nor Bush attempted to get the Senate to ratify the Rome Statute, and so it stayed there. The signature on the Rome Statute from, I think, 1998 through to 2002, when the Bush administration simply left the Rome Statute. It just withdrew its signature, and then of course it added to that the so-called I think the Hague Invasion Act, whereby should any American serviceman be arrested on the basis of some warrant issued by the ICC, any American serviceman, and particularly if he was held in captivity at The Hague, any U.S. administration would be obligated to invade The Hague and seize the imprisoned U.S. servicemen. So the Congress passed that without any effort. So therefore, it served as a warning to the ICC. If you even think about arresting, detaining any American serviceman pursuant to an ICC warrant, we will invade The Hague and we will just simply free one of our own. And so there things stood, and successive administrations had kind of toyed with cooperating with the ICC. They quite liked the ICC when it supported U.S. military action. So, for instance, when the ICC issued an indictment of Muammar Gaddafi and his son and his intelligence chief in 2011 during the bombing of Libya, the Obama administration was, of course, delighted and took that indictment as evidence that the American cause was just, because Muammar Gaddafi was, of course, a criminal, and the ICC had now confirmed that he was indeed a horrible criminal. So that was okay, but that didn't mean that the U.S. was willing to return to the Rome Statute. And then, of course, under Trump won, things became a lot more fraught, and then he issued sanctions against the chief prosecutor of the ICC. I think her name was Bensouda, and prohibited her or any of her investigators to come to the United States. So that was then, and now, of course, since the war in Gaza, we had the ICC issuing an indictment, no less, of Bibi Netanyahu. And of course, once they did that, then that really just burnt all bridges with the United States. And that culminated now, a couple of days ago, with the United States announcing that they were sanctioning the president of the ICC and the chief investigator. Now, it's a very interesting thing. I mean, this is just the United States. Let's remember, the United States is not a party to the Rome Statute. So the United States doesn't even acknowledge that it's under any kind of falls within the jurisdiction of the ICC. But nonetheless, the Europeans who identify themselves with the ICC, they did that somehow the ICC embodies European values, whatever the hell they are, but they immediately went into action to condemn what the United States did. Now, this is all very, very strange because, as I say, the United States is not in any way, shape, or form subordinate to the Europeans. Europe does not have any say in American decision making, and the United States is not a party to the Rome Statute, and so the United States simply does not accept the jurisdiction of the ICC. So you thought, why are the Europeans so indignant about about what the Americans have done? And there, I think you get into the very interesting psychology of contemporary Europe, and that in the European leaders assume that the United States is their own kind of personal bodyguard. It's supposed to do what the Europeans demand of them. So when the Europeans want this, the Americans are supposed to jump to it and do whatever Europe wants. So when it comes to give Ukraine everything it wants, give Ukraine the tomahawks, give it the Leopard tanks, give it the HIMARS, the ATACMS, the Patriot anti-missile systems. Well, the Americans have to give it all because we Europeans demand it. So the Europeans almost assume that the United States is their own personal property. It kind of, we own it. It belongs to us. And therefore we get to condemn and we get to have a say in what the United States does. Because again, as I say, none of that has anything to do with the Europeans. I mean, the Americans could do whatever the hell they want. I mean, if they've never liked the ICC, they've never recognized the jurisdiction of the ICC. The only time, as I said, that they've ever looked upon kindly on the ICC is when the ICC has done something that favors U.S. policy. The one example, obviously, was, as I mentioned, the indictment of Muammar Gaddafi. But then, of course, in 2022, when the ICC issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin, the Biden administration got very excited and also took that as a sign that, well, our cause is just. Look, the ICC has issued an arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin. But now the Europeans have become very indignant about something that really does not concern them. It really does not concern them. The United States can absolutely, these are unilateral sanctions, but so what? The Europeans issue unilateral sanctions every day of the year. And the Europeans take these unilateral sanctions of theirs as somehow as holy writ. We talk about this constantly, how the Europeans claim they have a right to board ships that they suspect are carrying Russian cargo, whether it's Russian oil or anything at all. So they say, well, we have a right because we have imposed sanctions against Russia, as if their sanctions have some kind of validity of international law. Even though they're unilateral, they have no international standing. Now, in this case, the United States has merely said they've expressed their own feelings about the ICC. I mean, yeah, it is very much about the U.S. support for Israel, and that's a given. However, it's still consistent with the U.S. Position that basically they detest the ICC. But somehow Europe has rushed out with a huge defense of the ICC. Somehow this is this ICC, this is who we are, this is where we are. Now, as you know, I have no time whatsoever for the ICC. I mean, the International Criminal Court is a phony organization, fake organization. It has nothing to do with international law. It has nothing to do with any kind of international jurisprudence. It has no relationship even to the United Nations. The ICC was simply created by the Western powers, who managed to bamboozle a lot of very foolish countries into signing on to the Rome Statute. Others were sensible and kept away from it, but it has no international standing. But somehow the Europeans and the Clinton administration, this was the heyday of humanitarian intervention, they declared the ICC as really the exemplar of the end of impunity and the exemplar of international cooperation, and the bringing of miscreants to justice. So the Europeans, would be the sort of the avenging angels swooping in on countries and to bring the terrible people like Muammar Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein or Slobodan Milosevic, bringing them to trial, bringing them to justice. Now, anybody who believes in national sovereignty, anyone who believes that ultimately, when it comes to justice, nation states should be the ones to dispense justice, should have nothing to do with the ICC. You should think this is the last thing we want. The last thing we want is that our countrymen would be handed over to the international unaccountable judges. Even calling them judges is a joke. I mean, they're not judges in any sense. I mean, they're just people who have gone through law school, got some kind of a law degree, and now espouse sort of completely meaningless cliches. And so, the notion that any country should hand over people to the tender mercies of these so-called judges, and that this is this is where the direction we should be heading, ceding sovereignty, because nothing expresses sovereignty more more expressly than having jurisdiction over your own people. No, so that this is you don't allow any other country to stand in judgment over your own citizens. If they've committed a crime, then they should be tried and prosecuted, convicted or not, by your own courts. You don't hand them over to someone else, and you certainly don't hand them over to some international unaccountable body. And of course, we saw all of that in the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, which was the prototype for the ICC. That was launched in 1993. It came before the ICC. and the Western powers loved it. You just simply put on trial all the people that you don't like. You put on, in the case of Yugoslavia, they put on trial all of the leaders of the Serbs, the Serbs of Serbia, obviously, the Serbs of Bosnia and Herzegovina, the Serbs of Croatia, and the Serbs of Kosovo. All of them were put on trial at the ICTY. They were handed down draconian prison sentences. A number of them died, incidentally, in custody at the ICTY, including, of course, Slobodan Milosevic. And this was fantastic. But of course, the ICTY again had no real authority on anything. Now, the ICTY, which was created by the international by the United Nations Security Council, still had more standing, some international legal standing, because it was created by the UN Security Council. The ICC was not created by the Security Council, was not created by the General Assembly, has nothing to do with the United Nations, so it's entirely a kind of a fake creation. So therefore, as I would say, whatever your feelings may be about Israel, whatever your feelings about Bibi Netanyahu and about everything that Israel is doing in Gaza, the West Bank, or anywhere else, the answer is not to start invoking the ICC, because that's the worst possible remedy. Because if you give any kind of legitimacy to the ICC, you are laying the groundwork for the ICC to come after the people that you want, that you regard as heroes, and that others would like gone after. So in this case, if you, let's say, you think, oh, this is great, the ICC has issued an arrest warrant against Bibi Netanyahu, that's fantastic. Okay, so yeah, now you're giving credence to the ICC. What argument are you going to deploy when the ICC goes after, Vladimir Putin? You've already granted it legitimacy. You can't then turn around and say, "Oh, the ICC doesn't have any authority. There's no right to go after Putin because I like Putin." You've lost the argument. Because you've already accepted the principle that the ICC is right when it goes after the people that you don't like. But anyway, so what happened was that Marco Rubio and the State Department issued the other day sanctions against the president of the ICC. And let me just go through that statement from the State Department. And here we have advancing the United States campaign to address the threat posed by the ICC. And the Trump administration has been clear. The ICC is a corrupt and fatally politicized supranational court that has maliciously abused its authority and exceeded its mandate. We will not tolerate its assault on state sovereignty. And then, in furtherance of the diplomatic campaign we launched last month to address the ICC's abuses of power, I am designating 2 ICC officials, President Tomoko Akane of Japan and ICC senior trial lawyer Abdoulaye Seye of Senegal, pursuant to Executive Order 14203, imposing sanctions on International Criminal Court. These individuals have directly engaged in efforts by the ICC to investigate, arrest, detain, or prosecute officials whose government has not consented to ICC jurisdiction. The ICC has repeatedly attempted to assert authority over nationals of the United States and other countries that have not consented to its jurisdiction. Let's see if something's gone wrong here. And the ICC has repeatedly again, this sets a dangerous precedent for all nations. Our whole government campaign to dismantle the threat posed by the ICC to national sovereignty will be sweeping, and we expect more countries to join our campaign by ending their funding and participation in this politicized and unaccountable court. The ICC's ability to target American nationals and those of other nations, non-state parties, must end. The Trump administration stands ready to take additional measures, if necessary, to systematically dismantle the ICC until it is incapable of threatening American sovereignty. And then, of course, we'll go through the responses to it. But everything there is perfectly reasonable. The ICC is unaccountable. To whom is it accountable? It can just simply seize figures that he doesn't want, seize them, and people don't like them. Well, too bad. The measure of how little accountability these international bodies have, we saw during the days of the ICTY, because there nominally the ICTY was answerable to the UN Security Council. In theory, the UN Security Council created it. But the UN Security Council then declared it to be independent. So basically, UN Security Council had no means of exerting any kind of influence on what the ICTY was doing. So people died in the prison of the ICTY at The Hague. They had their own little prison, and people died there, including the great Slobodan Milosevic. He died in really quite mysterious circumstances. The UN Security Council, they didn't get to have any say in the matter. They didn't get to investigate. The ICTY investigated itself and absolved itself of any responsibility. The Dutch government, because after all it's housed in at The Hague, the Dutch government said, well, we don't really have any kind of responsibility for anything that happens in the portals of the ICTY, because that was the deal we signed when the ICTY was created on our territory. We just don't have any say. We don't, if the ICTY tells us, oh, so-and-so died of natural causes, then we just simply accept it. We have no right to investigate any suspicious death in that prison. So that was the ICTY, and that's the same goes to even to a greater extent at the ICC. So the very idea that anybody at all, should advocate giving powers to unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats, unelected, unaccountable prosecutors, unelected, unaccountable judges. I mean, these are complete clowns. These people who are called judges. You want to give them powers? So whatever your feelings may be about Marco Rubio and the Trump administration and whatever, you have to say they're absolutely right. They're right to say we don't have anything to do with the ICC, and in fact, we're going to go beyond that, and we're going to hit the ICC with sanctions. The basic their attempt to impose their jurisdiction, because remember, the way it was supposed to work, the way it was supposed to work was you had to accept the jurisdiction of the ICC. And then once you've accepted the jurisdiction, then the ICC can come and investigate, prosecute, or whatever. But then they got around it and say, well, only one of the parties is necessary. So let's say country A is involved in a war with country B. Country A recognizes the jurisdiction of the ICC, but country B doesn't. Then the ICC can investigate, even though country B has never accepted the jurisdiction of the ICC, and the ICC then has the right to issue arrest warrants of the nationals of country B because country A has recognized the jurisdiction of the ICC. And this is how the ICC got around the problem that of Russia, because Russia, again, foolishly, and I'm going to mention this before, very, very foolishly, very naively, signed on to the ICC, was a signatory of the Rome Statute, just as the United States was. But the Russians did not leave the Rome Statute in 2002 when the Bush administration left, but instead stayed on till about 2016, quite late in the day, 2016, only withdrew from the Rome Statute when the ICC issued, I think, a report claiming that Russia had they claimed that Russia had committed war crimes in Ukraine. And that moment, then Russia withdrew from the Rome Statute. But it's quite late in the day. But in any case, Russia does not accept the jurisdiction of the ICC. And Ukraine also initially didn't accept the jurisdiction of the ICC. But then signed on, and once Ukraine signed on to the Rome Statute, then the ICC said, "Oh well, now we have the right to investigate war crimes in Ukraine," and then of course that's how it held that it had the right to issue an indictment against Vladimir Putin. Anyway, here then is the statement of the European Union External Action, which of course is Kaya Kallas's agency, and there it is. The EU reiterates its unwavering support for the ICC. Well, then you say, fine, good for you. Well done. You have unwavering support for the ICC. So what? The United States isn't forcing you to do anything. You want to hold to your unwavering support for the ICC? Go right ahead. The EU deeply regrets the decision by the United States to impose sanctions against the President Tomoko Akane and senior trial lawyer Abdoulaye Seye. And the ICC is a cornerstone of the international criminal justice system and the global fight against impunity, cliche after cliche after cliche. It plays an essential role in ensuring accountability for the most serious crimes of concern to the international community as a whole. Its independence, impartiality, and ability to carry out its mandate must be free from pressure, intimidation, or interference. That the question of its impartiality is so depends on in the eyes of the beholder. So far, almost all of its defendants, almost all of the people that the ICC has put on trial and convicted have been Africans. Why Africans? Well, because they're the easiest people to go after. You don't go after the Europeans. You don't go. Obviously, you don't go after the Americans. I mean, because there's, I mean that the Hague Invasion Act, that's still on the books. You could go after the Russians, and I think the ICC may hope. Let's say they hope that. Should Russia lose the war, should there be an uprising inside Russia, and all those wonderful things will happen, that the Europeans' dream will happen, the storming of the Winter Palace, and and so on, and hey, we'll be able to get our hands on Putin, Lavrov, and Gerasimov, and so on. So that. They pursue that, but that doesn't make it in any way a kind of an impartial body. But in any case, even if you claim that it's impartial, even if you want to make that claim, it doesn't matter because neither the United States, nor Russia, nor China, nor India, nor Iran, nor North Korea, in fact, almost any country with any kind of weight in the world, not one of them recognizes the jurisdiction of the ICC. Europe does. They created it. They think it's fantastic, but no serious power recognizes the jurisdiction of the ICC. No serious power will allow some unaccountable supranational body to put its citizens on trial. Now, what is strange, and I think this is what I really want to focus on today, is this which I think is a kind of almost like a suicidal complex on the part of the Europeans to antagonize the United States at a time when essentially what the European game is to get the United States to fight its war against Russia, because the Europeans are careening towards a war with Russia. I mean, through their seizing Russian cargo ships, the constant hysterical bluster. We talked on Tuesday about the drone attacks and on Russia, which is clearly being aided and abetted, financed, supported by the United Kingdom. And when the Russians issued a threat to the UK, the UK Prime Minister Andy Burnham said, well, you can take that threat and shove it where the sun don't shine. Okay, well, that's fine. You know, the British media got very excited by this tough talk from Andy Burnham, but you still have the issue that, well, how are you going to fight this war against Russia without the United States? So this is probably the time, if you want if you want to go down this path of war with Russia, you want to keep in with the United States. So there was really no need to rush out these statements. But we know how the Americans feel about the ICC. We know that they've always detested it. We know that the United States will never accept the ceding of its sovereignty to some supranational body. It's just not going to happen. That's it. Let them do what they're doing. They're not saying the Europeans, unless the Europeans also withdraw their signature from the Rome Statute, then they're going to sanction the Europeans. They just simply said, we will not have these creatures running around the world professing themselves to be the highest international court. We just won't accept it. But no, boom, out come the Europeans with all their empty bluster, just in order to infuriate Washington at the time when you need Washington most of all, at a time when you're going out of your way to try to provoke a war with Russia, which you clearly cannot fight on your own. Anyway, so here then is the ICC intermission sanctions against the court, its officials and personnel undermine its work. The EU stands firmly with the ICC and will continue to provide its full support to ensure the protection of the court and its staff against external pressures or threats. The EU remains unwavering in its commitment to the Rome Statute and to safeguarding the independence and integrity of the court. And then the ICC naturally came out with its own statement. The ICC strongly rejects new U.S. sanctions designations. And then, they go on. These sanctions are a flagrant attack against the independence of an impartial judicial institution, which operates pursuant to a mandate conferred by its state parties. Well, okay, but the United States is not a state party. I mean, it's good that you said it's a mandate conferred by the state parties. It's not a mandate conferred by the United Nations. Has nothing to do with the United Nations. So since the United States is not a state party, then you don't have a mandate as far as the United States is concerned. And the United States just simply isn't going to have you going around claiming some kind of jurisdiction against American personnel or Israeli personnel or any other personnel. Because we don't recognize your jurisdiction. And so, oh no, kind of conferred by the state parties. Well, good. If they, then the state parties can happily hug one another and say, oh, we're so thrilled that we are a state party to the Rome Statute, and we can't wait to accept the jurisdiction of the ICC. Fine, but that doesn't apply to anyone else. As a result of these designations, at present, 9 of the 18 judges, both of the 2 deputy prosecutors, the former prosecutor, and 1 staff member have been sanctioned by the United States. Well, good. I mean, I think I think that's all to the good. Such measures targeting judges, prosecutors, and staff who work towards the fulfillment of the mandate that was conferred by the ICC by the states undermine the rule of law. It doesn't undermine the rule of law. The United States is not one of the states. It's not a party to the Rome Statute. And it's because it's not a party to the Rome Statute, it simply refuses to accept the idea of ICC judges pretending that they have some kind of jurisdiction over American personnel. When judicial actors are threatened for applying the law, it is the international legal self that is placed at risk. Oh, God, oh, my. Threats and coercive measures also impact the ability of victims to seek justice as they turn to the court when all other avenues have been exhausted. As previously stated, the court remains undeterred and stands firmly behind its personnel and behind victims of unimaginable atrocities. The court will continue to fully discharge its mandate with the independence and impartiality in full accordance with the Rome Statute and in the interest of the victims of international crime. So this is the standard boilerplate, and that always these international courts come up with, oh, it's about the victims, it's the victims' justice. Well, of course, it's not victims' justice, and as I've argued in books and articles and so on, it's not victims' justice. If you're not dispensing justice, you're not really helping victims. These international criminal tribunals and the ICC are a mockery of justice. They're a mockery of a legal proceeding, but they wrap themselves up in this sanctimonious. We just look at that, the sanctimonious words. I mean, the ICTY was always coming up with the sanctimonious nonsense. But with the ICTY, thanks to I think Russian feebleness and Russian irresponsibility, the ICTY was created by the UN Security Council. So at least they had that, which the ICC doesn't. Anyway, so here, out they come. They're all, we, international justice. That's what we stand for. Now, of course, the Europeans, knowing that that even in its own terms, even within the terms of the ICC, they can't get the ICC to do what they want it to do. They want the ICC to put Russia on trial, to put Vladimir Putin on trial. That's their goal. Now, we know Putin was indicted by the ICC. That was in 2022, but the ICC really, but the Europeans wanted something a little more than that, because the indictment really referred to the story of the abducted children. The children weren't abducted, but okay, be that as it may. What the Europeans want is to put on trial Putin for the crime of aggression, waging a war of aggression. Now, this was always a very sore point with the ICC, because in the days when the Rome Statute was negotiated, this was, as I say, the glory days of the 1990s, the Americans were very much involved in those negotiations. But everybody else who was involved, the Europeans, knew that the red line for the Americans, what would absolutely guarantee that the United States would walk away from the negotiations, would be if the crime of aggression was added to the crimes that the ICC was supposedly had jurisdiction over. So they had on the crimes that the ICC had jurisdiction over was the crime of genocide, obviously, crimes against humanity, yes, a violation of the laws of war, yes, but not crime of aggression, because they knew that if they put the crime of aggression into the Rome Statute and said that's another one of the war crimes that we'll have jurisdiction over, they knew the Americans would walk. The Americans would absolutely walk out from the negotiations because the United States has waged a number of wars that are could be said to be aggressive. It's even in the 90s, the glory days of the 90s. They knew perfectly well that the war against Yugoslavia was a war of aggression. Now they justified it. Oh, we're coming in to save the Muslims. Oh, we're coming in to save the Kosovo Albanians or whatever. But anyone else to say, yeah, but that's it's a war of aggression. I mean, Yugoslavia posed no threat to you. You waged this war against Yugoslavia without a UN Security Council mandate. So they knew that was going to be a sore point. So they kept the crime of aggression out of the Rome Statute. That changed some years later. They had the sort of the Kampala doctrine, and they did introduce the crime of aggression into the Rome Statute. So the crime of aggression did become another one of the crimes that the ICC would have jurisdiction over. But they had to actually say that this was the decision that was taken at Kampala. They had to say that states had to explicitly accept ICC jurisdiction over the issue of aggression before anybody at all can be put on trial for the crime of aggression. Well, I mean, a number of countries obviously did, but since Russia wasn't any longer a signatory to the Rome Statute, so obviously then Russia didn't accept ICC jurisdiction over the crime of aggression. So basically, the Europeans knew that there was just no way they could use the ICC to try Russia for the crime of aggression. So therefore, the Europeans said, we're going to create our own little court. We're going to have our own court, an EU court. And they have now allocated funds for this. There's an EU court being prepared to put Russia on trial for the crime of aggression. So it has no jurisdiction, none whatsoever. It has no legal standing, nothing. There's no, it has no, it's just nothing. It's a zero. It's like, like a few people at a bar can get together and say, hey, we're gonna have a trial. You be judge, I'll be prosecutor, and he'll be the defense attorney, and we've got a court. And so they know this, but that's the Europeans. Europeans despise international law. So when they issue these statements, these ridiculous statements that we just looked at, you have to remember these are the same people who have now set up, or are in the process of setting up, their own little court to put Russia on trial for the crime of aggression. Not anyone else. Not anyone else. Just simply Russia on trial. That's their respect for international law. So therefore, well, here are the Americans who just say, hey, this is absolute garbage. We don't want to have anything to do with that. And in fact, we're going to sanction the president of this court. And then the Europeans who suddenly, impunity, we're against impunity, we want real, international justice. they have no interest at all in this. Their idea of justice is simply we can use our institutions to punish those that we don't like. And then, and this is where it gets ridiculous, you go out of your way to antagonize the Americans, the very people that you need. I mean, what do you think? Lithuania was now talking about the ICC. Is Lithuania? You're going to go? You're going to go fight the Russians? Who? How? With what? Anyway, here then is the the ICC with continues values the consistent demonstration solidarity of state parties, civil society, and all those who support the rule of law and justice for the victims of international crimes. The court will continue its work with all partners and with the unwavering support of its states parties to ensure the effective and independent implementation of its mandate. And then the Guardian, of course, always on hand to scream about international justice. ICC decries latest U.S. sanctions as flagrant attack on courts' independence. Well, anyway, they talk about this. The slap sanctions on 9 of the 18 judges, both of its deputy prosecutors, its former chief prosecutor, and one other prosecution office staffer. The U.S. accuses the court of overstepping its mandate by investigating and seeking to prosecute senior military and political officials from countries such as Israel and the United States that are not members of the court. The move came weeks after Rubio announced that the U.S. was launching sweeping campaign to dismantle the threat posed by the International Criminal Court to U.S. sovereignty. And then Rubio said he would pressure the court's 125 member states to withdraw from the institution, sanction organizations, and work with the court and ban staff from traveling to the United States. And then since then, Venezuela and Chad have announced they plan to leave the court, bringing the number of countries to pull out of the court in the past year to 5. It takes a year for a country's decision to quit the court to be formalized. Now, this is, of course, very interesting because you'll remember from last year that somebody says, is Russia a member of the court? I just explained that it had been a signatory of the Rome Statute. It had never ratified the Rome Statute, so it was exactly the same situation as the United States. But then in 2016, when the ICC issued a report essentially accusing Russia of having committed war crimes, I think it was war crimes in Georgia, that the Russians were accused of having committed war crimes, then Russia withdrew completely from the Rome Statute. But as I said, I think they left it a bit bloody late. They should have withdrawn many years earlier. They should have withdrawn when the Bush administration withdrew. Now, the point here is that this really is not at all what you're supposed to do when you get into these those courts. And one example of this was about a year ago when Viktor Orban, basically it was giving the finger to the various international institutions. He said, because Netanyahu had obviously been indicted by the ICC, he said, Netanyahu is very welcome to come to Hungary, and I don't care about the ICC. Hungary was at that stage a signatory of the Rome Statute, as with all the other Europeans. We're not going to enforce any ICC arrest warrant. Oh, and by the way, we're leaving the Rome Statute. Just as you said, we're leaving the Rome Statute. We're giving our 12-month notice so that within 12 months, we will be out of the ICC. Now, again, and of course, Netanyahu did indeed come to visit Hungary. He wasn't arrested. It was all very friendly. Um, but again, we had the familiar chorus of international busybodies and nobodies denouncing Orban for having defied international law by saying he wasn't going to arrest Netanyahu, and that he was under some kind of an obligation because he's a party of the statute. That, of course, is a lie. I mean, anytime they say these things, the media says these things, that you are under an obligation. You are under an obligation to arrest um, somebody that the ICC had issued a arrest warrant. That is a crock. It is an absolute crock, because ultimately all decisions about arrests rest with the national sovereign institutions. And indeed, the Rome Statute recognizes this. If you look at Article 98 of the Rome Statute, it recognizes that these decisions are sovereign decisions. So a state can indeed say, we will not arrest the president of a country who's visiting us, because there's a state interest in maintaining good relations with the state whose president is visiting us, and therefore it would be contrary to our national interest to seize him while he's a guest in our country. That's recognized within Article 98 of the Rome Statute. So when you read this nonsense in the media that somehow you're under an obligation to do something, then just always keep in mind that is a lie. You are not under any kind of an obligation to do this. And that's why, just as a sidebar, but I've said this before, but I'll repeat it, it's worth repeating, so that when South Africa, which is a member of the BRICS, so South Africa failed to give a guarantee to Russia that we will not arrest Putin if he visits South Africa, then South Africa showed itself to be an inconsequential, rubbishy country. So we can't do it because of the Rome Statute, because we're under an obligation as being a signature of the Rome Statute. Well, no, you are not. You have the out with the Article 98. You absolutely have because they had to introduce that into the Rome Statute, because otherwise, states would say, well, you're stripping us of all sovereignty if we're now under some kind of an obligation to go to war with some other country. Hey, if you arrest the president of a country while he's on your soil, I mean, that's kind of a warlike act. So you can't really force the state parties to go to war, and that's why they gave them an out. But in any case, Orban said, we're not going to do that, and we're going to walk out from the Rome Statute. We've given a notice. We want out, 12 months' time. So then we have a new regime in Hungary that unfailingly does stupid things. And so the new regime, the Magyar Péter regime, declared that, we are rescinding the Orban order to withdraw from the ICC. So we're back in. We're in. And the Hungarian, as the Hungarian foreign minister, he always sends out these tweets. Hungarian diplomacy is back. We're back. So we're in the ICC. We're firmly right slap in the middle of the ICC. We're back. Well, that only guarantees you bad relations with the United States. I mean, you had that under Orban. You had very good relations with the United States. Now, so because you've gone back on something that was actually quite important to the Americans. I mean, Orban was smart enough. I mean, Orban always knew if you're going to have bad relations with Brussels, as he did, then you better have good relations with Washington. You've got to have good relations with one or the other. But in this case, I think for this Peter Magyar regime, they have good relations with Brussels, but that's not going to get them very much. So they've also unnecessarily antagonized the Americans, which is kind of will be a problem for Hungary. Anyway, let's still continue with this. And here we have the German Foreign Ministry, the Auswärtiges Amt. So they sent out this tweet. Germany reaffirms its support for the independent International Criminal Court and for international criminal law. In doing so, we also draw a lesson from German history. For us, it is clear the International Criminal Court makes the world safer and more just. It prevents impunity and strengthens the rights of victims. It is of central importance to defend and protect it as an independent institution. All right, so right away you think, well, hold on, whoa. Back up a little bit there. I'm pretty sure Germany had said that we Germans will never enforce an arrest warrant against Netanyahu should he come to visit Germany. They said we cannot do it because of our history. Our history is such that we just simply can't do it. So this is very confusing because they say, well, because of our history, we thoroughly endorse the ICC, but earlier they said, hey, whoa, because of our history, we can't possibly arrest Bibi Netanyahu pursuant to an ICC arrest warrant. Well, that's very confusing. Your history tells you one thing, and then your history tells you the opposite thing. That leaves everybody very, very confused. And then we have this Tom Berendsen. Who's Tom Berendsen? Tom Berendsen is the foreign minister of the Netherlands. Tom, our friend Tom. Pleased to have spoken to with the president of the ICC, Judge Tomoko Akane. I commend her leadership and value our close cooperation. As host nation and state party, the Netherlands stands firmly behind the ICC and its vital work for international justice. And then Berendsen wasn't going to let it go there. He said, the Netherlands disapproves. This is really, if you're in the United States, you must be really pained to receive the disapproval of the Netherlands. The Netherlands disapproves of the latest sanctions against officials and staff of the ICC. International courts and tribunals must be able to freely carry out their mandate. We fully support the court and its staff. I have invited this judge to discuss our continued support. Now, the Netherlands has made its territory available to these fake, phony, fraudulent courts, because that was really where, this is the origin of these, the first formulations of the international laws of war. We had the Hague Conventions at the end of the 19th century, and then of course the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, which is affiliated with the United Nations, is housed there. So, but the most important is the fact that it was the Hague Convention which really set out this whole program of creating laws of war, and that's one of the special place in the Hague. But then it became very problematic because then the ICTY, as I say, was set up at The Hague, and the Dutch, in their eagerness to be as ingratiating and as fulsome as they could possibly be towards the United Nations, they signed an agreement with the UN whereby they had no jurisdiction whatsoever about what went on at the ICTY. So nothing at all. The fact that these trials that they held were fraudulent, there was no justice, no fairness, no impartiality. But more seriously, this prison that they had there, the ICTY ran its own prison at The Hague. Well, the Dutch simply said, we have no say in it. They were ready to sign away all jurisdiction over what went on in that prison to the ICTY. So that when they had these deaths, and as I say, there were a number of deaths that took place in that prison, when they happened, the government of the Netherlands said, well, it's nothing to do with us. We signed this agreement with the United Nations whereby we completely gave up our sovereignty. We just simply said, this is sovereign territory. This is sovereign United Nations territory. We don't have any say in what went on there. Nothing. We don't have any say. Now, that's pretty despicable. I mean, no country should ever sign away its sovereignty. I mean, you can't respect any country that signs away its sovereignty in such a way. But it just became very embarrassing when essentially the most famous political prisoner, the most famous prisoner of the ICTY, Slobodan Milosevic, died. He just suddenly, boom, he was dead. And there were a number of real questions about that death. You're free to read that. It's available on the internet. I wrote extensively about the strange circumstances of his death. But what was striking about that was that everything was rushed through. Boom, the autopsy, boom, 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 done. And the Dutch simply had no say in anything. They didn't conduct any of their own investigation. I said, well, it's nothing to do with us. We just work here. I mean, it's the responsibility of the ICTY. It's the responsibility of the United Nations. Nothing to do with us. So, when this Tom Berenson guy says, whoa, we basically say, well, you need to shut up. I mean, you've been a joke in that you have failed to provide any kind of jurisdictions or authority over what went on in your own territory. Anyway, then we have, after Tom had his say, we have Ursula. Ursula jumps in and she joins, she issued a joint statement with Antonio Costa and says the EU Council President, that's Costa, and I stand firmly with the International Criminal Court, President Tomoko Akane, and the officials who uphold its mission. The ICC helps deliver justice to the victims of some of the most horrific crimes. To carry out this essential work, its justice judges and officials must be able to act independently and without external pressure. So they are, as always happens when they send out these tweets, they're always it's the same kind of copy and paste. They will issue that same statement by the victims and justice. Now, obviously, you can say, well, that's very interesting, but you always make sure that you will not be investigated. And they made absolutely sure when the ICC got itself involved in the Libya thing, as I say, in 2011, because the Obama administration and the Europeans wanted the imprimatur of the ICC on what they did, so they were happy to get the ICC involved, but the ICC made clear that it would only investigate what Muammar Gaddafi and his government did. It didn't have a mandate to investigate anything that NATO did. So that and I think and that was within that UN Security Council resolution that the ICC could investigate, but who could only investigate one side. It could not investigate anything that NATO did during that bombing campaign. So that so when von der Leyen talks about impartiality and justice, it's all hooey. And then after von der Leyen, we have the foreign minister of Finland. So it's amazing. We have the Finland. We always think about Stubb with the president of Finland, but there's also this Finnish foreign minister who was always on hand. It was like a kind of Kaja Kallas like figure, who was always popping up at various times. This kind of nice looking blonde. She's the foreign minister of Finland, but she's always there on hand to make some inane statement. Finland deeply regrets the new sanctions imposed by the US against the president and the trial lawyer of the ICC. The ICC must be able to fulfill its judicial mandate without restrictions. We reiterate our strong support for the ICC. And then we have the Belgian foreign minister. So everyone's doing this. Everyone gets in on the act. Belgium condemns all sanctions targeting the ICC, its officials, and those cooperating with it, and so on. And then Belgium will always stand with the victims in their pursuit of justice. We also stand in solidarity with the court staff and many civil society organizations working tirelessly. And then the French, French Foreign Ministry, France has learned of the new U.S. sanctions against the president of the ICC. France condemns all forms of threats and coercive measures against the court, its staff, and civil society organizations support it. Such measures constitute an attack on the court and all 125 state parties to the Rome Statute and are contrary to the principle of judicial independence. France expresses its solidarity with the judges targeted, and so on. And then here we have the Germans then talked, and here's the story. Germany on Wednesday criticized U.S. sanctions targeting the president of the ICC and said, "We stand by the International Criminal Court and its president, Tomoko Akane," this is the German Foreign Ministry spokesman, told the press conference, "The ICC has exposed heinous crimes against humanity. It has held accountable those guilty of the gravest crimes. It is thus fulfilling its mandate exactly as intended." So again, you look back and you think, okay, that's fantastic. The Europeans do the whole thing that they stand for values. Of course, they don't stand for any kind of values at all. But what really is striking about this is that they're going ahead with antagonizing, unnecessarily, but nonetheless antagonizing the United States. Because this is something, this is a long-standing, this isn't Trump, this goes back to the Bush administration, the Hague Invasion Act, that goes back to 2002. So that's already a quarter of a century ago on the ICC. So they're rushing, we got to defend the impartiality of the ICC. As I say, the ICC has never been impartial, but they want to show themselves that this is our values. This is who we are. Well, that's great, but what exactly what have you accomplished by issuing all these condemnations of the United States? Because you know that this is something that the Americans feel very strongly about. But the interesting thing is that this collapse this collapse in relations between Europe and the United States is, as I said, coming at the very moment when Europe has, when it comes to this war in Ukraine, it only has two options. It can either pursue this belligerence towards this Russia, this constant need to provoke Russia. If it does that, it needs to keep in with the Americans. That's the. Or if it doesn't want to keep in with the Americans, if it doesn't like Trump and he just finds him too overbearing, too brutish, too intolerant, then it needs to go to the Russians and try to work something out. But you can't do both, which is why Europe it comes across as so pathetic. That they're antagonizing Russia, heading, I think, towards a serious conflict with Russia, a serious shooting war with Russia, while antagonizing the United States. Europe cannot fight Russia without the United States. That's it. That's just it cannot be done. You can only do it with the United States. But the more they continue like this, the more ridiculous it stands. So recently there was a story in Bloomberg, which was then taken up by other publications, of a questionnaire. There's a questionnaire that the Pentagon has been sending to U.S. allies about how do you really feel about the United States? Are you really supportive of U.S. policies? Now, the Europeans don't really want to do that. They want to answer these kinds of questionnaires, but they've sent out, this is a questionnaire, to U.S. allies. Could you just fill it out and sort of we can have a better idea of how you feel about U.S. policy? This is the last thing you really want when you're heading towards war. That your chief ally, your enabler, wants to know from you, how you feel about the United States. So here I want to just show you. This is a story that appeared in Bloomberg, and you can see the headline: U.S. presses allies on ideological loyalty ahead of troop cuts. Ideological loyalty. And then in a document recently sent to NATO members and seen by Bloomberg News, the U.S. asks a series of questions that gauge support for the president's approach. Has the country been publicly supportive of U.S. foreign policy? What restrictions has the country placed on the U.S. military using its bases? And then the document also tries to assess whether countries are spending money with U.S. defense contractors, and it asks whether they have publicly opposed regulations that inhibit contracts with U.S. firms. Overall, it queries, has the country shown alignment with the U.S. approach to strong, clear, and quiet, and then referencing a line from Pete Hegseth. And then the allies have balked at the move, seeing it as an attempt to strong-arm them into ideological alignment in exchange for U.S. protection, according to people familiar with the matter. And then goes on, linking America's long-standing security commitments to such fealty would upend the post-World War II transatlantic relationship, which was built on U.S. military guarantees that superseded many political disagreements. Ah, I see. That's where you get this European smugness and arrogance. Apparently, you get this guarantee from the United States Boom, blank check. You got a guarantee, and you don't have to do anything in return. You just, you're just there. Hey, we just get this guarantee. And so this would upend this World War II relationship. Now, I mean, let's say I don't think that's quite the way I would describe the World War II relationship, because the World War II relationship required from the Europeans support for U.S. foreign policy objectives, and then when the Europeans did not support U.S. foreign policy objectives, then that created all sorts of tensions between Washington and Europe. But it's, whatever you, I mean, obviously, I think NATO should have been dissolved long ago. It's an absolutely horrific organization. It creates war, it creates instability wherever it goes. It's a catastrophe, it's a disaster. But that's not what the Europeans argue. They want lots and lots of NATO. We want more and more and more NATO. We just don't want to do anything for it. We just want the Americans to provide us with a blank check. Well, that's a forlorn hope, because the United States isn't going to do that. That's just not who they are. They're not going to give anything to you for free. So when you expect them, which is what they expect, when you expect them to go to war on your behalf, when you expect them to commit national suicide on your behalf, I mean, in other words, it's quite possible that there'd be an exchange of nuclear missiles. If you expect that, then the Americans are going to want something in return. And that's the logic of it. That's why, obviously, the conclusion is that NATO is an organization that should not exist. But nonetheless, if it exists, and if the Europeans are so anxious to maintain this organization, then they're going to have to pay a price. And that price is you're going to have to support American foreign policy. And I think that's what the Americans are saying. Things that are important to you may be important to you. They're not important to us. And by the same token, things that are important to us aren't really very important, may not be important to you. But there it is. We're not just going to support you on the things that are important to you, and then we can't rely on you on the things that are important to us. And and so that here you got Bloomberg saying, oh, you can't possibly expect to do it. We just simply get a blank check. We're just entitled to a blank check. And anyway, the story then goes on. Already, Trump's team has tried to boost right-wing forces in places like Germany and Hungary while offering extra troops after a preferred candidate won the presidency in Poland. That's a kind of a separate point. It doesn't have anything much to do with anything. The questionnaire arrives weeks into the Trump administration's 6-month review of its military presence in Europe, which is expected to conclude by December. The move has left NATO allies bracing for deep cuts to American support, including troops stationed in Europe and military assets the U.S. would send during an attack. And then the document indirectly touches on numerous issues that have divided Washington from its NATO allies, including the U.S. attacks on Iran, the raid to capture Nicolas Maduro, and a European push to give defense contracts to local firms. The question about public support for U.S. foreign policy, for instance, specifically mentions initiatives in the Middle East and the Western hemispheres, both areas where Trump has conducted strikes without NATO's support, and then Iran and so on. And the document asks whether each country has imposed these bans. This is the bans on using local bases to strike Iran, and includes a follow-up question: are they willing to reduce or eliminate any such restrictions? And then similarly, the U.S. startled NATO allies in January when it seized and arrested Maduro. the Venezuelan leader as part of a push to reclaim American influence over the Western Hemisphere. Many European countries considered the raid a violation of international law. This is actually nonsense. The Europeans didn't really consider that at all. They went along with it. They were quite perfectly happy with it. They just they didn't necessarily think it was a great idea, but neither did they raise any particular objections to it. So this is all kind of post facto hooey that somehow the Europeans really were very unhappy about it. No, they went along with it, and there were no condemnations of it. And I mean, none of the condemnations that we just heard today about the ICC. So that that the seizure of Maduro, they just shrugged their shoulders over that. And again, when it comes to Maduro, remember the Europeans had supported American policy on Maduro. You remember those years when the Trump administration decided that Maduro was not the legitimate president of Venezuela, and the real president of Venezuela was Juan Guaido. And the Europeans, absolutely, to a man, they fell into line with the Trump administration policy, and there was no basis whatever for it, no evidence whatever. And they said, no, we withdraw our recognition recognition from Maduro. We now recognize Juan Guaido. Where's Juan Guaido? We recognize Juan Guaido as the legitimate president of Venezuela. So don't give us this crap that the Europeans, they weren't happy with the Trump. They went along with the Trump policy very happily. That was as illegal an act as anything that Trump did by simply declaring that the real president of Venezuela is Juan Guaido, who had never run for anything. He had never run for office. So there was no basis whatever for claiming that Guaido was was the legitimate president of of Venezuela. And then, of course, you had the British who seized the gold of Venezuela. Again, what was the legal basis for that? That gold is still in the hands of the British. This was gold that was parked at the Bank of England. The British still are holding on to that. They still have not released any of that gold. What's the legal basis for that? So don't give us the whole idea that the Europeans stand for international law. Just please don't do it. They do not stand for international law. Just because they say it, we stand for international law. You can say anything you like about yourself. It doesn't mean that anybody is under any obligation to believe you. Anyway, this continues, and then we have the questionnaire also digs into the divisive issue of defense budgets, asking for receipts, showing compliance with a push to hit higher spending targets and have Europe replace U.S. military assets. Notably, it asks whether countries are buying from American firms and whether they have spoken out against new Made in Europe policies. If not, would they be willing to do so? Well, again, the Americans, they drive a hard bargain and say, hey, we want you to spend your money with American contractors. And then Al Jazeera, they published bits from this document. This is a confidential document, but Al Jazeera published bits from this document. It says, Pentagon quizzes NATO allies on political loyalty. And it says the Pentagon has handed NATO allies of the United States a long list of questions about whether they are adhering to President Trump's vision for the transatlantic alliance. And then the questionnaire asks pointedly whether the allies have been publicly supportive of U.S. foreign policy priorities. And then another bullet point poses the query, has the country shown alignment with the U.S. approach to be strong, clear, and quiet? Again, this time. And then it said, the markings on the document and the phrasing suggest the questions are meant to guide interactions between U.S. officials and their NATO counterparts. And then The most overtly political questions come at the end. One question probes allies about whether they have placed restrictions on U.S. access and bases and military flights over their countries. And are they willing to reduce or eliminate such restrictions? And then here we have a senior defense official from a NATO ally says the administration has been confusing NATO topics with unilateral U.S. military operations. This questionnaire also reflects this confusion. NATO has nothing to do with the Middle East. Well, that really isn't true. That really isn't true, because NATO was indeed very actively involved in the Middle East. NATO was involved in Libya. NATO took to the bombing of Libya. NATO was very much involved in Iraq, and you can go to the NATO website, and you will see, type in Iraq, and there you will go into great detail that will present you with all the things that NATO has been doing in Iraq. So that's untrue. It's just flatly untrue that NATO has nothing to do with the Middle East. This is another NATO lie. NATO is very heavily involved in the Middle East. NATO was also heavily involved in Afghanistan. Again, go to the NATO page, www.nato.int, and type in Afghanistan. And you get document after document after document about NATO's involvement in Afghanistan, NATO's involvement in Iraq. But what's important isn't even that. What's important is that what the Americans are saying, and it's not unlike what the Russians often say to the Americans, or usually to the Americans, because the Russians don't really talk to the Europeans, but the American, which is that you only ever want to talk about the things that are important to you. You never want to talk about things that are important to us. That's, in other words, hey, when it comes to arms control, that's a matter that's important to you, the Americans, because the Americans are obviously a little worried about Russia's nuclear capabilities. So that's something America wants to discuss. But what matters to Russia, for instance, is NATO expansion. And Russia said, we want to discuss that with you. Oh, we don't. There's nothing to do with us. A lot of other countries involved. We don't want to talk about that. Well, that's the point. But the same criterion applies to the relations between the United States and Europe. Because when it comes to Europe, they only have one thing that they're interested in. That the one thing is, of course, Russia. They want to go to Russia. They want to fight this war against Russia, destroy Russia, or whatever they want. Now, as long as Biden was there, the Biden and the Democrats, they share that view of Russia. The same thing. They look upon it. Yeah, that's our main thing. Particularly after Russiagate, the Democrats were very much on board for destroying Russia. But Trump didn't really. That wasn't his thing. He wasn't really that interested in it. That's not to say that he ever was firmly opposed to it, but it wasn't really his thing. When he said it's not my war, I mean, it wasn't quite true what he said, but nonetheless, it was true to the extent that he wasn't interested in it. Iran and the Middle East and everything else is for some reason something he is interested in, even though he had promised that he would keep out of Middle East wars. He said these are all completely wasted. $8 trillion that we've wasted in wars in the Middle East, we're going to keep out of them. But nonetheless, he's very interested in them, much as Republicans often are very interested in the Middle East. So, but what the Americans are saying, well, we'll go along with you. We'll go along with you on Ukraine. But if you want us to support you on Ukraine, if you want us to really get nasty with Russia, which is what you want from us, then you've got to support us on the issues that matter to us. and Iran matters to us. Again, it's not a, it's not. I'm not taking the position that I agree with this. I don't agree with it. Obviously, I don't. I think it was obviously the war in Iran was a disaster. But you can see the Americans' point of view. We're not going to go out and just risk a war for you when you're not even prepared to support us in the Middle East. That's why they send out these questionnaires. They're just, I don't know, frankly, we're getting tired of this. We're getting constant demands. Oh, send the we want the Patriots, we want the Tomahawks, we want the Abrams tanks. Just we want all of it. But we're not prepared to support you on something else. Well, that's got nothing to do with us. And then this goes on. This is from this questionnaire. NATO's strategy and leadership. Has the country formally endorsed NATO 3.0? This is the Trumpian plan for the new NATO 3.0, including allied leadership of Europe's conventional defense with critical but more limited U.S. support? If so, have they done so publicly? If they have not done so publicly, are they willing to do so? If not, why not? Are they willing to do so? And then, has the country formally endorsed a NATO focus on a denial defense and deterrence by denial along the Eastern Front? If so, is it reflected in their formal military strategy, doctrine, or other official guidance? If not, are they willing to do so? Is their endorsement public? If not, are they willing to make it public? If they have not endorsed denial, why not? Will they do so? Has the country taken on additional responsibilities within NATO's command structure? Other lines echo Trump's demands that the allies spend more on defense and contribute more to NATO's command, and so on. And then Trump, for instance, has repeatedly berated Spain. We know that, and so on. And then again, more here, operational support for U.S. forces. What, if any, restrictions has the country placed on U.S. access, basing, and overflights? If so, why? Are they willing to reduce or eliminate any such restrictions? What other limitations or costs does the country impose on U.S. forces in their territory, including through the status of force agreements? And what has the country provided or offered to provide in terms of host nation support, such as direct cost sharing, infrastructure upgrades, or auxiliary support for U.S. operations? And then here we have Euronews, which is really now, they've gone on getting onto this NATO 3.0, and they're not happy about it because NATO's it's supposed to be about us. It's about us Europeans. The Americans have got to do what we want them to do. It's about we're the ones who matter. The Americans are just our own personal valet service. And here we have, to fill the gaps being created by the ongoing U.S. drawdown, Europe and Canada have significantly increased core defense expenditure with an agreement to spend 5% of GDP on defense and so on. And known as NATO 3.0, this is effectively the implementation of Washington's plan for a fundamental reduction in its military contribution to NATO's defense of Europe. As the US steps back from the continent, Europe will need to step up and attempt to fill the resultant gaps. And then crucially, the concept of NATO 3.0 was developed in the US under Elbridge Colby. And critics argue that NATO 3.0 is effectively a diminution of Washington's commitment to European security and represents a fundamental shift from the founding idea that the security of Europe is interchangeable with the security of the US. Now, the security of Europe is, of course, not the same as the security of the US. It never was. On the contrary, it's quite dangerous for the US. But what is really happening, first of all, there's no danger to the security of Europe. That's just, it's made up. when Kaya Kallas talks about breaking Russia up into lots of little countries, and she's the one to talk about it. Nothing comparable has been said by any Russian leader. No Russian leader says, you know what, we would like to break up all the countries of Europe. We'd like Germany to break up into its individual Länder, and we would like to see, this ever smaller countries in Europe. We'd love to see Italy break up, the north and the south and everything else. Russia's never said this. When Kaya Kallas said that, she showed that Europe, of course, has aggressive intent. There's a very good chance that there will indeed be a war between Europe and Russia. But that's not going to happen because Russia is going to invade Europe. So what the Trump administration is saying, what I think Elbridge Colby is really saying here is, well, the Europeans need to take care of Europe. It's their continent. It's their responsibility. They need to put their forces in place. There really isn't much of a threat in Europe. I think that's the American point of view, because I think Colby and Trump, I think, probably have a common sense view, even though they haven't acted on it. Common sense view is Russia just wants to address its own domestic problems. I mean, that's been the case really since the fall of the Soviet Union. Russia needs to address its domestic economic problems. So the Europe can take care of security in Europe, and then the United States can deal with the big enchilada, the elephant in the room, which is China. I mean, that hasn't happened, because the United States has got itself bogged down in the war that it didn't intend to fight. That was the very war, the Middle East war, that Trump had said he's going to avoid. So the original plan, which is, hey, we're going to contain China, we're going to challenge China in the Pacific, that hasn't happened. But in principle, that somehow the Europeans should take care of the problems on the continent while under the supervision of the United States. Well, that's a perfectly sensible point of view. That's not how the Europeans see it. The Europeans see it as well. We want you to fight the wars for us, and we don't like you getting yourself distracted by things that don't matter to us. We don't care about the Middle East, and we don't care about China. You've got to be here and attend to our issues. Well, that isn't working with Trump, but that isn't to say that it won't work if the Democrats come in. Because if the Democrats come in, it's quite possible that there'll be a kind of a new, re-energized anti-Russian policy, and then the Europeans can be happy and say, "Oh, we've waited Trump out," which is what they're trying to do now. We wait Trump out. We've waited him out. Now the Democrats are here, and happy days are here again. So it's a possibility. But this NATO 3.0, which the Europeans are obviously absolutely hate, is, I think, based on I think a sensible analysis, which is there really isn't any security threat in Europe other than the one that the Europeans, and then before that, with the help of the Americans, particularly with the Biden administration, that they have created the security problem. That was there. There was no need for it, but getting so heavily involved in Ukraine kind of now created that security problem for Europe. And this was, in fact, even said in that national security document from late last year, when the Americans really berated the Europeans and said, "Hey, you got yourself into this mess on your continent by pursuing these very anti-Russian policies, and you got yourself into this mess. We don't want that. It wasn't our idea; it's your idea." But obviously, this isn't the message the Europeans want to hear, and so they get their media outlet talking about lipstick on a pig, NATO 3.0. But fundamentally, um, this this war in Ukraine is indeed catastrophic, and for somebody or other, this is going to end badly. It could be for the United States, or it could be for Europe, but it is going to end badly. Anyway, let's now go to our locals community. This is the community that supports and the journalism that we do here, the analysis that we offer here, and so we're very very grateful to the Gagglers that who continue to support us. So thank you so much. And as I always say, if you want to ask me questions, if you want to address any issues, please join our community. It's well worth it. We have some really really talented, smart people who are members of the community. So you're always going to be learning something from Gagglers as I do. So thegaggle.locals.com. Thegaggle.locals.com. So please join. Anyway, Danuki, one of our earliest members and one of our most prolific posters, says, "Hello from Bulgaria." Hello, Danuki. Is the spirit of Anchorage resurrecting itself a year on, or are the Kremlin idiots being, oh no, led by the nose again? Well, yes, it's very interesting because, of course, yes, we are indeed 1 year on from all of the hoopla and the flurry of excitement about Anchorage. As I've said, I mean the Russians and particularly Lavrov, not Putin, but Lavrov have insisted that somehow the Americans went back on their word at Anchorage, and again, I have no sympathy for the Trump administration. I'm not, they've obviously made one disastrous mistake after another. Nonetheless, there obviously was no agreement at Anchorage. Now, whatever the Russians took Steve Witkoff to be saying, which apparently was enough to induce the Russians to go to Anchorage, that somehow the Americans were willing to make serious concessions. Whether that was a misunderstanding or whether Witkoff didn't really understand exactly what he had said, but either way, it was clear at Anchorage that there was no agreement. And it does seem completely pointless. And so it's not like there was a document signed and then somebody withdrew his signature, because we've had those kinds of things. I mean, we like the Istanbul Accord. I mean, it did seem like they were close to some kind of an agreement. They'd initialed it or whatever, but at least there were at the Istanbul talks in 2022. It did seem like they were close to an agreement. But in this case, there was no agreement. And so I have to take the side of, well, not so much take the side, but I have to then agree with what Marco Rubio said, which was there was no agreement. What we said at Anchorage is that this proposal that was discussed by the Americans and the Russians, this proposal we're going to take to Zelensky, and we're going to take it to our allies, our NATO allies, and see what they think. So, I'm sure that that's exactly what the Americans said. Okay, we've got a proposal. Now we're going to see what Zelensky and what the Europeans think. And then they said, of course, no, we don't want to have anything to do with it. It's terrible, horrible, and so on. There was no agreement. So I think it's quite pointless to suggest that somehow, we were close to an agreement. Well, there was no agreement. there was not close to an agreement. Yeah, I mean, Trump did his usual thing at the news conference. It's, as is his wont. Oh, we're very close to a deal. That's what he always does. He's always saying we're very close to a deal. There's nothing new about that. But once he made clear to the Russians, and it was obviously he made clear to the Russians that any deal, any acceptance of a deal would be conditional on acceptance by Zelensky and acceptance by America's NATO partners. And so they said, no, we don't go along with it. Well, I think it was always obvious they would never agree to this. But that's it. So that's it. It's over. There's no point in discussing this. No point in sort of bringing up Anchorage as if somehow there was agreement was at hand. Agreement was not at hand. So it's just a waste of time. But and Putin, I think, to his credit, never says we were close to a deal at Anchorage. But Lavrov does say it, and I don't know why he's doing it. I think it's silly. Anyway, Stone River, always good to see you, Stone River. And then Stone River says, George, a bit of a gaggle topic, but can you share any pearls of wisdom from your take on the Jason Arday affair that has gripped the UK? Well, I really don't have that much more to add. I mean, there's been millions of words poured out about him. They, I mean, he was obviously. I mean, he was a charlatan. I mean, I think that was. There's no other way to describe it. He was a charlatan. Now, he was obviously pushed into this position by powerful institutions that wanted to be seen to be, race and gender sensitive, and DEI and everything else, and well, they wanted to show, hey, we're no one can accuse us of supporting white men and everything else. So we're pushing minorities. We're pushing this this person. And I think ultimately, when you think in terms of, well, what was, I mean, what was Cambridge thinking? I think they felt that if the whole thing unravels, and they had to have known that it would unravel. There've been questions about Jason Arday. It had been going on for years. I mean, there was clearly bubbling below the surface. There were questions about his doctoral dissertation, other work that he had done about the plagiarism. Obviously, there were questions about his biography, all these illnesses that he supposedly had recovered from. None of it was believable. But I think Cambridge was thinking that if the whole thing collapses, then they're going to come out of it well. They're going to come out of it and saying, well, we acted well. We acted nobly. We acted with the best of intentions. We wanted to promote a minority to the most exalted position. And even if, well, he wasn't really qualified, and he had made mistakes here and there, that's going to, the way they presented, he's going to make mistakes. But at least we were on the right side. At least we meant well. At least we tried to do good. I think that was how they justified to themselves what they did. Now, he himself, as a lot of people are understandably expressing sympathy for him, because, well, a young man is now dead. I mean, obviously, the young man is dead, and it's understandable that people should be very sympathetic. Particularly he leaves behind a wife and two small children. Oh, obviously, it's very sad, but you can't get him off the hook. he was, as I say, he was a charlatan. Now, obviously, other people are culpable. Other people had pushed him. But he spun lie after lie after lie after lie with, he understood the system. He knew how to play the system, and it worked for him. It worked for him for a long time. He went from one um, exalted position to another, this professorship, another professorship, and then finally a professorship at Cambridge, one of the most renowned universities in the world. He knew he was playing the system. He knew how to play the system, and he was doing it. No one was forcing him to do it. He did it. The fact that others were culpable doesn't mean that he's was is free of culpability. Now the question is, well, what takes place now? And that somehow there's going to be an anti woke movement and whatever. I don't believe it. As always happens with these cases, it's like probably going to be the opposite. I think there's going to be the feeling that we mustn't allow the right to exploit the Jason Arday case. We mustn't allow anti-minority feelings to win out. We mustn't allow anti-woke to win out. We mustn't allow anti-affirmative action hiring to win out. So I think, oddly enough, it will strengthen the woke establishment. I don't think it's going to weaken it. And I think that, on the contrary, it's the media that will come under attack, and the media will have to somehow defend themselves. And as usually, they don't do a very effective job. They're going to have to defend themselves and from the accusation, "Hey, it was you hounded this poor young man. You did this. This poor young man from a minority." And it was you who did this, and they're going to go after the people who brought to light all of his his plagiarisms, his lies, and everything else. They're gonna do badly, and this is when we've already seen this happening. The guy who really first brought to light the story of the plagiarism. Now he's about to be fired from the University of Ghent. So it's not working. This isn't going to end with the triumph of the anti-DEI movement. It's not going to end with the triumph of anti-affirmative action. I think it's going to be on the contrary. It's going to be more DEI, more affirmative action. Cambridge isn't the one that's going to come out of this badly. It's not going to be Cambridge. It's going to be the people who push for this. And remember, as I go back, Jason Arday, who people are saying very sympathetic, he was quite a nasty piece of work. He harassed journalists who were really pursuing this story. But the story originally was going to be run in the Times Higher Education Supplement. So the Times Higher Education Supplement journalists had pursued the whole plagiarism story, and he was going to run it. And then there were the threats of lawsuits coming from our day, but obviously from the powerful institutions. And it was the Times Higher Education Supplement that refused to run the story. So essentially, they were intimidated by Jason Arday's and his patrons' bullying. So he's not someone to admire. But as I say, I think it's going to be this is going to strengthen the DEI case. It's not going to weaken it. I think it's the irony. And something similar happened in the case of George Floyd. I mean, we know, hey, this is a career criminal and a junkie, but what was the interpretation of the death of a career criminal and a junkie dying of a fentanyl overdose. We had the hysteria of the George Floyd and racism and taking the knee and everything else. So I don't think this is going to end in well, no, we're not going to do, we're only going to be hiring on merit. We're not going to be hiring people because they're members of favored minorities. No, that's not going to happen. That's not the conclusion. I think there's going to be even more pressure for hiring minorities. Anyway, thank you so much, Stone River. And then Cynthia, always very good to see you, Cynthia. Film scholar, film critic, film reviewer, with an amazing knowledge of cinema, the history of cinema, the different styles of filmmaking, who gives the gravitas and credibility to the Gaggle as the place where film buffs come to. This is where, if you're interested in the history of cinema, if you're interested in the auteurs, then you come to the Gaggle. And you come to the Gaggle because you have film experts such as Cynthia contributing to its pages. And of course, we have weekly screenings, always screen something interesting. And the screenings always come accompanied by Cynthia's very learned, very thoughtful, very smart comments and criticisms and judgments. So you can enjoy the film, and as you do so, you enjoy Cynthia's commentary. So you can do them simultaneously, do one before the other, but it makes the entire film experience of the Gaggle particularly enjoyable. So thank you so much, Cynthia, for all of your hard work and contributions. Anyway, Cynthia now asks the question. Yesterday you said Fedorov is backed by Soros, yes, who also backs Nabu, yes, and that Fedorov is against Zelensky, yes. So does that mean Soros is against Zelensky too? And if Nabu's job is to fight graft, why Zelensky want it under his thumb if his government is clean? Then there's the cash. Zelensky keeps U.S. War support and MIC, military-industrial complex, cash flowing. If Fedorov could disrupt that, why would the military-industrial complex want him out? And if Soros benefits from the military-industrial complex, why back Fedorov over Zelensky if he could disrupt that profit stream? And then Cynthia goes on. Nabu's Operation Forrest Gump targeted key figures in Zelensky's inner circle, who laundered $3.35 million to bail out former energy minister Herman Halushenko. The suspects compared the high-stakes jailbreak to Saving Private Ryan, but botched the plot by routing leftover cash to their kids' tuition accounts, leaving a clear paper trail. A wiretap suspect mocked the sloppy move. That's why Forrest Gump, a jab at how their clumsy scheme made them look like fools. And then Cynthia then goes on. The ultimate irony is that the fictional Forrest ends up a wealthy free man, while these crooks may lose it all. Unlike honest Forrest, Ukraine's elite tried a heist but lacked basic sense. Those who stayed faced frozen funds, lost jobs, and jail. Mindich and Zuckerman fled and still enjoy full freedom. Like Forrest, they're rich and safe, but unlike him, they got there via ill-gotten gains. They're likely to go free, living in Israel, out of Ukraine's reach and safe from extradition. Well, it's a complicated question. My own feeling was that the Sorosites, this is they kind of created this patronage system of the kind of the young, affluent Ukrainians who want this war to continue, but who basically don't want to do any fighting themselves. And so they find ways to get out of being sent to the front. And they get all these positions at these NGOs, lavishly funded by Soros. And so from the sidelines, they call for more war, but as long as they don't have to do any fighting themselves. And so Fedorov, who supposedly had this genius idea, hey, why don't we use drones, and why don't we, this is nice and clean, we don't have to use our infantry and get people killed, but let's just use drones, and that's going to bring Russia to its knees. Now, this, of course, was a nonsensical idea. You're not going to win a war by drones. You still need infantry in order to take towns, in order to take strategic locations. You need to be able to take them and hold them. That's the way wars have always been fought. You still need your infantry. The drone war, that can have some spectacular results, and the TVs are all there on hand to see. Oh, look at all the smoke rising from this refinery that's been hit. Oh, look, you've destroyed this or you've destroyed that. Oh, we've knocked out this warehouse, and so on. We're bringing the war to the Russians and everything else. And you've got these people on Twitter who then very excitedly write about, Russia's really on the back foot because this oil refinery has been hit and so on. But you're not going to win a war that way. And I think that was the argument made by Syrskyi, who was the Ukrainian commander-in-chief of the armed forces, who say, we're not going to win it. We need the manpower to win a war. And so we don't waste our precious resources fighting this somewhat pointless drone war, but naturally the Sorosites prefer it that way. Now, Ukraine is, of course, a wholly owned subsidiary of the West. I mean, the West run Ukraine. They created Ukraine. They run it. They created Zelensky. They run Zelensky. But at the same time, they want to maintain an alternative, somebody that would be an alternative government if things go south. You always want a backup plan. And the backup plan, they had other figures in the past who were pushed, such as Zaluzhny. Zelensky obviously knew that Zaluzhny was being groomed as a possible replacement. And he got rid of Zaluzhny, packed him off to London, and so Zaluzhny is no longer on hand as any kind of a potential rival to him. And obviously then he saw that Fedorov, who he was kind of young and good looking and kind of glamorous, had he had the appeal of the young people. He saw him as a threat. Now, I don't think that whether it's the Sorosite, whether it's Soros, whether it's the Americans, or whether it's the Europeans, I don't think any of them really wants to get rid of Zelensky. I think Zelensky is the gift that keeps on giving. He's somebody he's just they see him as very useful. He's done everything that they wanted from him. There's nothing that he's doing that poses any kind of a problem for his patrons. There was a brief moment in February of 2025 when, after that disastrous meeting in the Oval Office with Trump, when you think, well, now maybe the time they're going to push Zelensky out because he's obviously just doesn't hit it off with Trump, and the Europeans are going to say, hey, we need somebody who's going to be able to have good relations with Trump. But that danger for Zelensky passed. It was over. It's over. Trump and Zelensky kind of kissed and made up, and now they have at least a decent enough relationship. So given that Zelensky has a decent relationship with Trump, given that Zelensky still enjoys all of the patronage of the Europeans, I don't think he's in any danger. I think the young people who seized on Fedorov and saw him as their hero, who's going to win the war miraculously with drone warfare. I think they were foolish. I think they made a huge mistake, and I think Fedorov has compounded his mistake, their mistake, by coming out with that statement. You can see the response has been very cool, and his assertion, which I think is correct, we can have an election. Of course, they can have an election. We can have an election, and we can let the Ukrainians decide. And he figures that if there's an election between him and Zelensky, he would win an election. And he probably would. But the Europeans don't want to have an election. The Americans, Trump did talk about holding elections. At various times he mumbled about which time maybe we should have an election and so on. But Trump seems, he's far too preoccupied with Iran now to push for the election. So he doesn't really care very much. He's not going to push Zelensky. Trump just isn't. He's not following this. He's just really preoccupied with Iran. So he doesn't really care very much. So the Europeans, they've got Zelensky, and now I think they're annoyed with what Fedorov did. It was one thing to have him in the background as this the cool kid with the black T-shirt as a possible replacement. It's quite another thing for him to issue a challenge to Zelensky. That's not what the Europeans want. They do not want Zelensky removed, because if you remove Zelensky, you just don't know what's going to happen. You remove a known quantity, and he's been there for more than 7 years. You remove a known quantity with an unknown quantity. That's very risky. And then, and there's these kinds of coups. They're very dangerous. They're very unpredictable. It's not a great idea to start switching horses midway through a war. So I think Fedorov overplayed his hand. I think he made a foolish move. As you saw, the parliament voted for Khmara, his replacement as defense minister. It was almost unanimous vote. So despite the video, just a few hours later, the parliament voted with Zelensky for Zelensky's nominee as defense minister. So I think Fedorov just overplayed his hand, and I think the Sorosites who supported him are probably very frustrated now. They didn't expect him to do this. They didn't expect him to issue that statement, that challenge, and they didn't want somebody bringing up this issue about the elections. We're all supposed to stay on message. We can't have elections. We can't have elections because the Constitution prohibits it. Of course, the Constitution doesn't prohibit it. Absolutely. And Fedorov, he didn't say it explicitly, but it's there. The message was here in that statement that the Constitution does not prohibit it. You can absolutely have elections. The law, they passed a law in 2015 prohibiting elections during martial law. Well, if you pass one law, you can pass another law that legalizes election. So I think Fedorov has overplayed his hand, and I think he's yesterday's man. I think he's done. I think he's going to have to go to the back of the line. He's now behind Zelensky. Zelensky didn't do anything like that. Zelensky did not issue any kind of a challenge to Zelensky. I think Fedorov did. I think Fedorov showed his youth and inexperience, and I think the likelihood of his becoming leader of Ukraine, I think, is very slim. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia, and then we have Aubergine. Very good to see you, Aubergine. Thank you very much, Aubergine, for your generosity. And Aubergine says, Dear George, happy St. Stephen's Day. Thank you so much, Aubergine. We're about 100 days into this abysmal, retributive Magyar regime. Here's hoping it lasts no longer than the 133 days of the Tonnage Costa Shashag. So the 130, I mean, the Tonnage Costa Shashag was, of course, the Hungarian Soviet Republic of 1919 that took power when the kind of the the sort of the bourgeois liberal government of Karoly, who put all its faith in the support of the Western Entente powers, but were unable to defend historic Hungary from all the nationalists who were just taking slices of Hungary, where they went. But instead, the Western powers, particularly the French, ordered Karoly to withdraw from Eastern territories. This is the French ordered it, and so this would effectively mean that Hungary's second city, Debrecen, would now be in the hands of the Romanians. And so the Karoly regime couldn't take it, and they handed power over to the kind of the socialists, the coalition of the Social Democrats and the Communists, in the hope that they would be able to mobilize the country to fight off these various Slavic nationalists who were helping themselves to pieces of Hungary, and in the hope that they would be able to get support from Lenin and the Russians. They obviously, as I said before, one of the leaders of the Tonnage Costa Shashag was my great uncle, Tibor Samueli. And they enjoyed a certain amount of military success. Certainly, they enjoyed far more success than Karoly ever did. But they made a lot of mistakes. Obviously, they were politically very inexperienced, and they tried to have a socialist revolution while they were trying to fight a nationalist war. Well, you can't do. You have to do one or the other. It's the kind of mistakes that Lenin didn't really make, but Lenin was very experienced politically. He had been involved in politics and revolutionary activity for 25 years before 1917. So he was ready for power when it fell into his hands. The people like my great uncle and Bela Kun really didn't know enough about politics, organization, and they made mistakes, even though they did have some successes militarily initially, but ultimately failed. They lost to the Romanians, and most important, Lenin really didn't have any forces to spare. He couldn't send any forces to help out the Tonnage Costa Shashag, the Hungarian Soviet Republic, and so it folded. They worked out an arrangement whereby the leaders of the Hungarian Soviet Republic would be able to board a train to Vienna. They would be given amnesty and to leave the country. They all got amnesty, sadly, except for my great uncle. He wasn't given an amnesty. He was arrested at the border with Austria, and he shot himself. Shot himself, obviously, in the expectation that he would not only be executed by the anti-revolutionary Hungarians, the whites, but he would probably be tortured before the execution. So he committed suicide. Now, I tend to think that the Magyar regime is far more disgusting than the Tonnage Costa Shashag. I think they try to do, things for Hungary. I think they try to save historic Hungary at a time when it was just simply being, gobbled up by its enemies. So and which in fact what happened. Hungary lost 2/3 of its territory in the year later at the Trianon conference. But I think the Magyar regime, which has no respect for national sovereignty, it has no respect for the Hungarian nation, is simply eager. He can't wait to sell out Hungary to the EU, to the Europeans. It boasts about how it's in with Brussels. How fantastic its relations are with von der Leyen and the rest of them. Well, von der Leyen definitely has no interest in Hungarian freedom, Hungarian independence, and the sovereign right of Hungarians to determine their own future. On the contrary, she says you have to play ball with us if you want any of the money that is owed to you. And the irony, of course, is, and it's not even that much of an irony, but that that this money that Magyar keeps boasting that he's managed to extract from Brussels, that money hasn't arrived. That money is conditional on Hungary fulfilling all kinds of commitments. You got to do one, boom, 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 boom. There's a whole list of things Hungary needs to do in order to get any of that money. They're not just going to give you, hand it over to you. One of the things they're going to want from him, and I think you allude to this, Aubergine, one of the things is this vengefulness, this this retribution, and that's what Brussels wants. Not only must Orban be defeated, not only must Orban be humiliated, but Orban must be made an example of. Orban needs to be prosecuted and imprisoned. And I think everyone in Hungary understands that that's coming. Some trials of Orban, his circle, will be coming in Hungary. And Magyar himself, I think, obviously wants. He's a very vindictive sort of person, but I think this is very much that Brussels won. So I think it's to compare this regime to the Tanácsköztársaság is very, very flattering to the regime. I think, as I say, the Tanácsköztársaság obviously made mistakes, but they did try to fight for historic Hungary. They did try to restore some of what was once historic Hungary. They couldn't restore all of it, but they did try to restore as much of it as possible. That's something that these people, Magyar Péter, would never dream of doing. Anyway, thank you so much, Aubergine. Really, really good question. And thank you for your generosity. And then here, Marty. Always good to see you, Marty. Marty, of course, is someone who's also a great poster on the Gaggle. So you absolutely must join the Gaggle, because his posts are always hilarious and always so interesting. And Marty's a prodigious researcher. He can find anything. I sometimes say, hey, I don't know, I can't find this. I've looked and I can't find it anywhere on the internet. And then lo and behold, 2 hours later, Marty has found it. So thank you so much, Marty. And here we have a picture of, God, this is Steve Witkoff, and of course Jared Kushner. And I'm not quite sure. I mean, I can see the Iranian flag behind that. So they are the ubiquitous negotiators on Trump's behalf. They negotiate with Russia and Ukraine. They negotiate with Netanyahu and Gaza, and then negotiating with Iran. They don't seem to be particularly good at it, and I don't know what their qualifications are to take this role. You would think that if you are going to do something like that, then you want to hire somebody with some experience of negotiations. I mean, somebody who's been around and knows how to do things, and but these are real estate people, and when it comes to Jared, he's not even a particularly successful real estate person. Most of his deals fall through. So, quite why they've done it, well, I guess. Well, one, obviously, that's his son-in-law, and Witkoff is obviously an old friend, but they haven't had much success I'm back. I'm back on. I don't know whether it says it said I was disconnected, but I don't know. Can can you just tell me? Can you because just to confirm, can you see me? Because I was told I've been disconnected, but if anybody somebody can say yes, you're back. I'm back. Okay, thank you so much. I'm back. I'm very happy to be back. And oh yeah, I'm back. Thank you so much. And yes, Marty. There's Marty with this picture. Yeah. So one picture on the right is, of course, Maduro when he was seized and in Caracas and brought to the United States, and then there's Marco Rubio in a very fetching outfit. It looks very yeah. And that's what they're looking very fetching in that outfit. So thank you, Marty, for that. Yes, look, yes, I remember seeing that picture of Rubio and wondering at it. It looks very strange. I just say he looks very fetching in that outfit. Anyway, thank you, Marty. And then Aristotle one. Aristotle, thank you so much. And Aristotle asks. Isn't the problem with the U.S. attack on the ICC not just that the attack is due to the U.S.'s craven submission to an Israel that rejects any form of constraint? That it isn't just that. I mean, yes, you're right. That obviously is a motivating factor, but the U.S. attack on the ICC predates the ICC's going after Israel. As I say, it started with George W. Bush in 2002 and the adoption of the Hague Invasion Act. In other words, already the United States was expecting the possibility that the ICC might start issuing arrest warrants for U.S. servicemen. So that's why they passed that legislation, again, now almost a quarter of a century ago, saying that if that happens, if any American serviceman is now imprisoned in the ICC prison at The Hague, the United States, within its rights to invade the Netherlands, go to The Hague, and to free any American serviceman. So that long predates Israel. I mean, I think that the U.S. Whatever. I mean, I don't disagree with you about Netanyahu. Yeah, absolutely. That's an important motivation and so on. That there's no question in that. But it is at the same time the ICC violates basic principles of sovereignty. I mean, you can't allow some supranational body. I mean, it would be bad enough if it was created by the United Nations. I mean, even then, as I say, it doesn't have any right to supersede the decisions of national courts and national governments. Even then, he just wouldn't have a right to do so. So even if it were created by the United Nations, but the ICC wasn't even that. ICC wasn't even created by the United Nations. So the ICC has nothing. The ICC, as you know, with all that bluster that we were reading earlier, it was created by the parties that accepted its writ. Well, okay, you accept its writ. You know, if you want to succumb to the jurisdiction of the ICC, go right ahead. Be my guest. You know, yeah, you want these people, these clownish judges, to sit in judgment over you, then that's fine. Go right ahead. You know, that it's your issue. But you can't expect somebody else to accept it. So there's no reason why the United States should accept it, or Russia should accept it, or China should accept it, or India, or anyone else to accept it. Then they say, the ICC, we don't accept the writ of the ICC. We don't accept the ICC's jurisdiction. And that's all there is to it. And even if we're in a conflict with another country, and that country accepts the ICC's jurisdiction, that doesn't mean the ICC will have any jurisdiction over us. We just don't accept it. And that's how the ICC operates. That somehow, well, okay, but we still have jurisdiction over you because you're involved in a conflict with someone else who does accept our jurisdiction. Well, no, it doesn't work. So I think when the Americans say we just don't accept the ICC at all, anywhere at all, the moment we sniff out any ICC person, we just don't want him. We want him out of the country. I think that's a reasonable position to take. And and that's leaving aside any ideas one can have about Israel. And I think that I think is the most important part of it. And so the ICC has nothing to do with international law. It has nothing to do with international criminal law. It's not about handing out justice or ending impunity or fighting for the victims or any other of that bullshit that we were reading out earlier. None of that has anything to do with the ICC. So if the Europeans want it, fine. You go ahead, knock yourself out. Don't expect the Americans to accept it. Don't expect anyone to accept it. Don't expect the Russians to. And as I say, the Europeans, if they're willing to set up their own little court to try Russia on this crime of aggression, if that's the contempt that they have for international law, then they have no right to lecture anyone else about international law. They have absolutely no right to do so. Anyway, thank you so much, Aristotle. And then Summer Petrus, good to see you, Summer Petrus. And then Summer Petrus says, Happy St. Stephen Day to you. Yes, thank you. Have you recently moved location away from a room open to siren sounds and today fireworks to your slanting library room? No, I do this because there's air conditioning in here. There isn't in the other room, and it's just a little warm doing live stream or even doing podcasts in this heat without air conditioning. So that's why I've moved here. But I kind of like it. I actually, now that I think, well, I actually prefer doing the live streams here. So I guess at some point I'm not going to be using the air conditioning, but I might continue to do my live streams here. And I like the book's background, even though some people point out and say, "Hey, how about put up some bookshelves?" And I'm familiar with that line of criticism, and I guess someday I'm going to get around to building bookshelves. But at the moment, I like those the books. Anyway, thank you so much, Summer Petrus, and then Aristotle. Returns. Thank you, Aristotle. It says, one thing that has shocked me about Trump is how he has gone back on everything. Yep. And made his supporters look like idiots. Yes, I absolutely agree. Even on nuclear weapons, Pelosi said that he was a lunatic who might use them. Seemed like Trump derangement syndrome. And now, is it true? That's a very good question. The nuclear weapons is obviously the the no, the absolutely forbidden red line that you can't cross, and so on. However, the more one looks at this war against Iran, the more one thinks, it may not be resolved short of some really devastating strike. And that might involve nuclear weapons. Obviously not, one of the big nuclear weapons, but something that would give a signal to Iran that we are really prepared to escalate. Because I don't think this is going to be resolved by the United States just walking away. You can't do that. I mean, the United States has walked away from conflicts in the past, but they were relatively minor conflicts, and they could walk away and still think, well, we have like Vietnam. At least in 1973, they walked away and said we have accomplished some of our goals. I don't think they can walk away from Iran without having accomplished any of their goals. So if the war escalates, and it's quite possible that the United States doesn't have, much more in the way of missiles. They've already used up a lot of their missiles and may not have enough, and they may not have enough Patriot missiles. I don't know. Who knows what is true in all these claims? But it's possible that they don't have enough missiles. That they don't have enough Patriot anti-defense missiles. Then, because I don't think, because I think if America just walks away having failed to accomplish any of the United States' goals with Iran, then it would be such a blow to the United States. It would be such a blow to its US's reputation that the United States couldn't recover from that. So that's why I think that it's because I don't think they're going to walk away, and because I don't think they're going to admit defeat, then they may just decide to escalate and really show Iran, hey, you don't have nuclear weapons, we do. You cannot win this war. You, a non-nuclear power, cannot win this war against a nuclear power. So I think that it's a possibility. And I think, like when Karaganov, in the case of Russia, says, that Russia needs to show that that Russia is ready to go to that next step, go to the next level of using nuclear weapons. It's the same logic. Hey, you can't remain a great power if you fail to accomplish any of your objectives. You have to show that you are a great power. And that's so I don't know if Trump will use nuclear weapons. I don't know if Russia will. But I do think that if you are a nuclear power, you cannot, but start thinking seriously about making your advantage felt. A nuclear power can then show that you're not going to lose to a non-nuclear power. It cannot happen. You cannot lose to a non-nuclear power. So, but your point has, you're absolutely right. Trump has indeed made his followers look like fools because he said, I'm going to stay out of Middle East wars. That's his selling point. I'm going to stay out of them. They cost, whatever, with these numbers, $8 trillion. So we're not going to do them anymore. Well, there we are. Anyway, Marty says, 30, talks about the Venezuelan gold, and that's still there in 30 tons of Venezuelan gold, a bargaining chip between Chavismo and the opposition. And here let me look. This is the headline. I haven't seen this story, but this is obviously from today. It says 30 tons of Venezuelan gold, a bargaining chip between Chavismo and the opposition. The U.S. will oversee the use of the Bank of England funds equivalent to $4 billion if the opposition and the government reach a pact with guarantees. Yeah. So basically, they're still holding on. The British still have they have the gold. Anyway, I think my time is up. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for all of your really interesting questions and comments and issues and illustrations and everything else. I really appreciate it. Thank you above all to everyone who contributed to the tip jar. It's what enables us to keep us going and do the work that we do here. The dogs, well, they're never satisfied, but I'll speak on their behalf and say that I'm really very, very grateful for your generosity. We'll do some more podcasts over the weekend, and then on Monday we do the joint live stream. I hope we'll be able to pull this off, joint live stream with Peter, and then on Tuesday we'll be back for the solo live stream. I hope to see you all then. Until then, all the best. Goodbye. Good night. See you.